Dear members and guests, welcome to our webinar at home with the Barjeel Art Foundation. For those who don't know me, I am Barbara Faranik-Matonet, founder and president of the Art Circle. We are very honored to have with us today Sultan Saud Al-Qasimi, founder of Barjeel Art Foundation. Sultan is an Emirati columnist and researcher on social, political, and cultural affairs in the Arab Gulf states. His tweets became a major news source during the Arab Spring, revealing the major news network at the time, until Time magazine listed him in the 140 best Twitter feeds of 2011. For the past few years, Sultan has been teaching classes on art and politics from the Middle East in international institutions of higher learning, including Yale University, Georgetown University, Boston College, American University of Paris, and Sciences Po. Souheila Takesh, curator of the Barjeel Art Foundation, will take us for a visit tour of the collection. Souheila is a curator at the Barjeel Art Foundation, where she works on research and curatorial development of exhibition and oversees the production of publications. She graduated from MIT's Department of History, Theory and Criticism of Architecture and Art, and has created exhibitions in the UAE, Kuwait, Jordan, Canada, and the US. The Barjeel Art Foundation is an independent initiative based in Sharjah in the United Arab Emirates. It was established to manage, preserve, and exhibit an extensive collection of modern and contemporary Arab art. It is contributing to the intellectual development of the art scene in the Gulf region and striving to serve as an informative resource for contemporary art by Arab artists, both locally and on the global stage. Before starting, I have a few administrative matters. First of all, we have put you all on mute. Please remain muted during the whole presentation. And may I ask you to address your question by writing them on the chat function. I will ask them for you in due time. Thank you very much, dear Sultan, for being with us today from Boston. Please join me to welcome Sultan Saud Al-Qasimi and Souheila Takesh. Sultan, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Barbara. Thanks to the team of Art Circle, and thanks for all of you for joining us. It's a pleasure to be here. I wish I was in person in Dubai at home to welcome you and show you some real hospitality, maybe offer you coffee and dates, and have Souheila show you a tour of the works. But one day in the future, you're all invited, you're all welcome to come and visit the works in person. Just to, one slight point is the collection that Souheila is about to show you is a part of the collection that is not on display in public. We have now about 120 works or so at the Sharjah Art Museum that you can go and visit, including a recent rehang that Souheila has conducted just in the last few days, where we switched 30 artworks. So even if you have been to the Sharjah Art Museum, we have new works that just arrived from Algeria, from Lebanon, from Palestine, from Syria, from Egypt, and other countries. We also have here in Boston, about 2 kilometers away from me, at the Boston College Museum, we have about 90 works, abstract works, on display on a touring exhibition. And the works that are at home are really, how do I say, they are victims of this constant shift in the art selection. And so these are the works that we love, and we really recognize and acknowledge their importance, but they're the ones that are not subject to the curatorial choices of one museum or another. And the one last thing as well is, these are the works, some of them are closest to my heart, and that is why they're hanging at the house where I live. And I'm sure you have the same. Some of you have several works. Some of the works make it to your living room. Some of the works are more intimate and they are in your bedroom. And so it really is subjected to a person's sentiments towards the artwork. I think nobody can give you a better tour than Souheila Takesh, who has spent many years and probably many more hours than I have with the artworks. And also to acknowledge that with her is Noor Tanir from Lebanon, holding the camera to show, where there is Noor. Hi, Noor. So Noor from Lebanon is joining us, and she's the one who's holding the camera to give you a tour. I will be present. Suhaila can answer all the questions better than I can, but I will be around. And if there are any questions later on, I'm also happy to tackle a couple of them. Thank you and enjoy the tour of the house. And once again, the invitation is open. Whenever I'm back, you're more than welcome to visit. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sultan.
Hi, everyone. Can I start, Barbara?
Yes, with great pleasure. Thank you, Suhaila.
Great. Okay, hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you, Barbara and the Art Circle team for putting this together, and also for selecting the Barjeel collection as one of the art collections that your members and your guests will have a preview of. So we will now switch to a different phone where my colleague Noor will start filming the tour of the house. Actually, I was thinking we could start outdoors while the sun is still out and have a look at a mural by Tunisian artist Steve, which is painted on the facade of the house itself. So Noor can point the camera to the wall here. Just be careful, Noor, don't fall in the pool. So El Cid is a French-Tunisian artist who pioneered the style which became known as calligraphy, which combines the art of calligraphy, classical calligraphy in Arabic, with the art of graffiti or street art. He obviously abstracts the Arabic letter form, so it's not very easily legible, even to an Arabic reader. And the verses that he usually uses are borrowed from poetry, from songs, and this particular one is from a poem that was penned by the late Sheikh Zayed. So we can go back into the house. And begin with this artwork, which you may already have seen on the invitation on Instagram by an Iraqi artist, Faisal Sahi. And Faisal was born in Iraq and actually began his artistic training at the Fine Arts Institute in Baghdad, and trained with figures like Hafid Drubi and Ata Sabri, and definitely was influenced by the work of his mentors, and was particularly influenced by the idea that Jawad Salim pioneered, which is in Arabic called Istilham al-Turath, or borrowing or inspiration from heritage, from tradition. So this meant going back to Islamic histories, pre-Islamic histories like Mesopotamian heritage, for instance, in Iraq, and then reviving some of those elements into something new and modern. So in the 1980s, Faisal began experimenting with painting the cafe, which kind of documented urban. So as I was saying, in the 1980s, Faisal Sahi started painting, public cafes in Baghdad and in Iraq more generally, and documenting the different kind of slivers of the Iraqi society, of the Iraqi community, where you would see, for instance, in the same frame, you would see an affluent gentleman smoking the hookah pipe, and we can tell that he might come from a wealthier background by the type of clothing he's wearing, and also the watch and the jewelry that is part of his attire. Then we see two gentlemen in the background reading a newspaper, a local newspaper called Al Haqa'iq. We see a younger boy serving tea, as well as another gentleman wearing sunglasses and reading a book called Thawra, or Revolution. So on the one hand, one might assume that he's sort of a revolutionary or a member of the opposition. But on the other hand, the sunglasses, sort of in the sinister appearance, almost hint to the idea that he might be a Secret Service agent. We see a man in a military attire. Other visitors in the cafe, a shoe shining boy here, you can see his equipment, as well as a server serving coffee. And apart from these characters who really start to serve as almost archetypes for larger groups within the Iraqi society, we also see the very particular elements of the interior spaces, like the tiles here at the bottom of the work, and also other objects like old radios, telephones, samovars, and so forth. What is interesting about Faisal Laib's work is that he almost borrows from miniature paintings in the way that he tackles perspective. So it's not a one-point perspective where you can really feel the depth of the field, but it's more of a flattened image where things appear sort of to exist on a single plane within the picture. All right, so we'll move ahead. We have a smaller work by Kuwaiti artist Thuraya al-Maqsimi from 1991 called The Parting. And it's a lino cut print, so it's an addition of several, several similar pieces. And it depicts a man and a woman and a dove, which is often associated with the idea of peace and sort of reconciliation. And it was painted right after the war in Kuwait in 1990. Here we move on to a Lebanese artist, Walid Raad, who came up with a very interesting idea for an art collective, which I believe was established in 1989. So he established this fictitious art group called the Atlas Group. And basically the idea was that this fictitious group would in some ways document Lebanon's history throughout the Civil War, but then the documents which became part of this archive were sometimes real, but sometimes completely fictional. And the archive was actually assembled by a fictional character, a fictional historian, who we can see in this image here, called Dr. Fadl Fakhouri. So, you sort of, when you look at these images, which do look very much, like archives or documents that could be found in an archive, we are tricked into, kind of second guessing whether or not they're real or imaginary, and which of these events are real or imaginary. And through this kind of approach, the artist, in some ways, critiques this idea of production of knowledge and authenticity of knowledge, and what do we deem credible and what do we not, necessarily believe, what we're critical of, and how are things displayed in a museum. So why is it that when we see something in a museum, we're more likely to take that history as being a true history, right? So this is a kind of conceptual project that he came up with. So even though it's called the Atlas Group, the author of these images and the author of these documents is actually Walid Raad himself. All right, so we move to another contemporary artist, Ita Barada, and this is called the Northern Provinces of Tangiers. And Ita makes a lot of work about her native city of Tangier and the kind of socio-political histories of that place, and particularly kind of focusing on the migration. The migration crisis and the kind of also histories that are involved in this process, where a lot of people actually try to cross from Tangier. I don't know if I can actually point because it's quite far, through the Strait of Gibraltar that you can see at the top here in order to reach Europe. So you have Tangier on one side and Spain on the other side. So again, she works with both found material like, postcards in this case, but also photography and other types of media. Moving along, we have a work by an Iraqi artist, again, Zian Azawi from 1983. And Azawi is one of the most prominent figures of Iraqi, both modern and contemporary art, I would say, because he did start practicing, kind of during a period that we are used to deeming as modern, but he's still practicing and producing work now. And Azawi was first trained as an archaeologist, so a lot of his work does incorporate, things like symbols and reinterpretation of particular objects like masks and things like that that could be found on archaeological sites. Now, moving to another piece. This is actually, I always say I'm not supposed to pick favorites, but it is one of my favorite pieces in the collection by Tunisian artist Nadia Ayari, who currently lives and works in New York. And it's called The Balcony. And in her work more generally, Nadia often uses recurrent, let's say, characters, even if they are inanimate objects like the fig, for example, or leaves or eyeballs, which we might actually see a few examples of later on. And again, exploring issues like surveillance and control and even sensuality through the fig and sort of sinuous lines of the leaves. But what I particularly like, just sort of on a more aesthetic level with Nadia's work, is the very thick and kind of very lush textures that she applies, in the way that she applies paint to the canvas. And I don't know if you can zoom in to some here, but you can probably see how thick and textured the paint is on the canvas. All right, so I think from here we will move along to another room. Maybe let's just stop here for a very quick look. This is a small work by Jawad Salim from 1951. And Jawad was one of the co-founders of the Baghdad Group for Modern Art in Iraq. And, he was sort of one of the most significant figures in Iraqi modernism. He co-founded the group along with Shakir Hassan al-Said, another important artist, and together they penned a manifesto in the same year, 1951, declaring what it means to really make, a national art, a national Iraqi art. And for them, they said it's the merging of traditional styles and heritage and reviving a lot of those, the material culture that was found locally with their trading that they received in Western Europe. Below it, we have a piece by Barwan Qassab-Bashi, an artist who was born in Syria but spent much of his life practicing in Germany. And he's very well known for these mask-like abstracted faces. You can see here on the side of the face, he has this black, thick black line, which is almost like a pillow. And actually, he told us when I pass away, you should turn the piece around so that the face kind of begins to rest on this pillow, which we should do because he did pass away a few years ago. Here we have a larger work. I don't know if you can actually capture it, by a Lebanese Egyptian photographer, Lara Beledi, and it's called Dunya, or Mother of the World, which is a term used to refer to Egypt. And here Lara creates a digital collage of, both kind of historical symbols, traditional imagery, but also pop, pop imagery and other kinds of images that you would find in magazines and on billboards. And so maybe you could just zoom into some of the details here in the work. So we will now proceed. Maybe stop at this work for a moment. This is by an Egyptian artist, Ezekiel Baruch. It's an untitled piece. And Ezekiel was active as part of the Surrealist group, the Art and Freedom group in Egypt. And his wife actually, Anat Fedida, she was one of the signatories of this artist's work was one of the signatories of the Degenerate Manifesto that the Art and Freedom group published in the late 1930s. And what the manifesto really was, most of you are probably familiar with the degenerate art exhibition that took place in Munich in the late 1930s and 37, where basically the Nazi party in Germany staged an exhibition of all the works that they confiscated from museums, which they deemed as to be degenerate, or kind of propelling the culture to go backwards rather than progressing. And this group included well-known figures like Picasso and Kandinsky and Paul Klee, people who now we very much celebrate. But in any case, they were kind of rounded up in this exhibition, and the following year, 1938, a group of artists from Egypt published a manifesto in which they expressed their support for these European artists, saying that this is an imprisonment of thought, and that they stand on the artist's side. And they concluded with the slogan something like "Long live degenerate art." All right, so moving ahead. I don't know if with the light you can really see the artworks here well, but here's another piece by Walid Raad, or the Atlas Collective, that we already saw in another room. And here again, he documents the cars from Lebanon that sort of, were part of these car bomb explosions during the war. But again, we are not exactly sure, which part of it is real and which is fictitious. Here's a poster from one of our previous exhibitions at Timoka, the Tehran Museum of Contemporary Art, which features a part of a work by an Iraqi artist, Kadem Haidar, The Sea Suspended. The exhibition took place in 2016. On this wall here, we have a sculptural work by Emirati artist Noor Suwaidi, who many of you might actually be familiar with. It's a work in plaster, which Noor, I feel like she's actually more well known for her paintings, so it's quite a rare piece in that sense. And above that work are 3 photographs by an Armenian / Egyptian artist, Van Leo. So he was actually born in Turkey, but fled with his family, who were of Armenian origin, and settled in Egypt. And he became known for these black and white portraits, either of himself, so the one in the center is an auto portrait, or of friends, celebrities, and a lot of the time they wear costumes in order to create these staged photographs. On the larger wall here, we have a set of 8 prints, again by Dia Al-Azzawi, the Iraqi artist. And these are to commemorate the Sabra and Shatila massacre in 1982, which took place in Lebanon, in Palestinian camps. And what each plate represents what was kind of inspired by images and photographs that Dia Al-Azzawi found in newspapers, contemporaneous newspapers at the time. And, of course, because of the visual semblance, it is often compared to Picasso's Guernica, and also in the ways that it reflects war and conflict. Great. Okay, so the work that you see right now is by an Iraqi artist, Halim Al-Karim. And it was inspired by the time that he actually spent in hiding for almost 3 years in when he was evading, kind of being drafted into the army under Saddam Hussein during the first Gulf War. And during that time, he became more interested in and had experiences with mysticism and the gypsy culture. And following that period, he produced an entire series of these veiled photographs where these figures of women appear almost mirage-like, like it's something that could just dissipate into thin air almost. All right, moving ahead. There's another quite long work, so Noor, I don't know if you can actually capture it. And this is a photographic collage work by a Palestinian artist called Jalad Manhi. and it's called House Number 197. And Jalal was born and grew up in a refugee camp called the Shafat Refugee Camp in East Jerusalem. Later on, during his adult years, he photographed the camp from a balcony and stitched those photographs together. So in some ways, this is his kind of childhood neighborhood almost. And on top here, we have another work by the same artist called Measures of Uncertainty. And again, here he captures this moment in a refugee.
We can't hear you anymore.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Yes, okay. I was just saying that this is another work by Jawad Malhi, the same artist that we have seen the photographic collage by, and it's called Measures of Uncertainty. It's also a representation of life in the refugee camp, but here he attempts to capture this moment, this fleeting moment when a street clash or a moment of conflict is over and the energy dissipates. So people start leaving the scene of where it happened, and there is this uncertain energy within the air, right? You don't necessarily know what had happened. You might still feel kind of the echoes of it, but the energy is dissipating. And that's why a lot of the figures you can see are sort of fading into the background. On the wall here is a work by another Palestinian artist, Abdelhai Musallam, who is a self-taught artist who usually made these relief type of works, either made of clay or of sawdust that he stuck together with glue. And in these works, he both captured the liberation struggle, but also everyday life and costumes. So you can probably not see the details here, but the kind of embroidery on the textiles and the dresses are very accurately and kind of meticulously crafted in this work. Another larger work on this side here is by a Lebanese artist, Mohammed Saeed Baalbeki. And while this work is untitled, it comes from sort of a larger body of work, some of which he titles as heaps. And Mohammed Saeed grew up in Lebanon during the Civil War and also during the Israeli invasion. And so his family moved around a lot. A lot of the times they sort of had to pick up their belongings very quickly and leave. And so he began painting these kind of stacked heaps of either just stuff, belongings like clothes and shoes and so forth, or in this case of suitcases. Next to it, we have a work from Egypt by Asma Dawistashi called Sad Egypt. And again, it's a difficult work to sort of place, but it does have some, one could say, surrealist undertones in the ways that it kind of juxtaposes reality with imagination and borrows from history as well. You can see symbols from Pharaonic history, from Islamic history as well, and kind of incorporates architecture of Cairo into the work, and also, things you would find in Pharaonic reliefs to create this amalgamation almost of different symbols. All right, so we'll just have a very quick look here in this room, and again, the light might not be sort of very conducive, but you can see another abstract work by Dia Al-Azawi, where he, apart from abstract shapes, he also begins to incorporate the Arabic letter form and to abstract it and kind of deconstruct it into its formal elements. And above the bed here, we have a section from a bigger set of works by Marwan Kassabashi called 99 Heads. And he kind of borrowed the idea from Ibn Arabi, from his writing in the 12th century, where he said something, don't quote me on this, but because I'm paraphrasing, but something along the lines that the face exists as one until you look in the mirror, and only then it multiplies. But I can send Barbara the exact line later on. And here's another bigger work by Marwan. Also one of those faces that on the one hand resemble a mask, but also kind of allude to almost a landscape, a topography of a face. Okay. So as I was saying, this is a work by an Iraqi artist, Rafi Nasri, from 1979. And Rafi, like many other artists from Iraq, began his training at the Fine Arts Institute in Baghdad, but later on traveled to China to complete his training. And you know, the influence of his training in China is evident in many of his works, in how he applies sort of the tones that, you know, that resemble the horizon that you can see here, you know, these horizontal kind of color fields, but also in the way that, you know, he kind of experiments with calligraphy and, you know, these brushstrokes. So you can see here in this section that Noor is showing you, even though the letter forms themselves come from the Arabic alphabet, but they do definitely also have an influence of, you know, the Chinese art of calligraphy. On this wall, we have a work on paper by Ali Jabri, who was born into an Aleppo family, but spent a lot of his time in Amman, in Jordan, and also painted a lot of historical sites, Petra. He, you know, documented a lot of historical artifacts, but later on also, you know, his work became a lot more engaged with satire and social commentary. Here's another work, an abstract work, which almost made it to the show in the US, but after all stayed back here in Dubai, by a Lebanese artist, Shafiq Aboud, who experimented not only formally, you know, through his work, but also in terms of material and mediums. So here is a work made of ceramics. If you can see, it's actually a relief that is composed of, you know, several pieces of ceramic. All right, so maybe now we can go into another room. Well, this is a piece we missed, I think, by Diane Azawi, a more recent piece from 2007. Again, pursuing this line of inquiry into abstraction. But this is quite different from his other work during this period, because it's not just a painting, it's actually a collage. It might not be apparent in the video, but the top of the painting is partially made of pieces of fabric that are stuck on top of a painted canvas. Yeah, the details are quite amazing. I see some people commenting. All right. Again, I'm not sure the light is quite conducive here. So this is a work by Dries Ben Yacoubi. It's called Goat's Bones, and it's an abstract piece. Next to it is a work by Farah Al-Qasimi, whose photographs you might already be familiar with. On this wall, we have a work by Musa Al-Hayyan, who actually participated in one of the previous editions of the Venice Biennale as one of the artists representing the UAE. And here you can see sort of these deconstructed horses. And Musa Hayyan actually worked on a number of commissions where he had to paint, you know, these traditional horses and stallions. So in some ways, this is, you know, this is almost him rebelling against this classical traditional style of painting horses and showing them instead kind of upside down and almost in space. And it does have that surrealist feel to it again. And on this wall here, which is the final piece in this room, is a work by an Iraqi artist, Al-Fraji. And it's a still from a longer video, which he began working on in the 1980s, reflecting kind of on the Iraq-Iran war. And it was a series of notebooks, but also drawings that then became an animation. And he couldn't display them at the time, and just recently completed the project, producing the video and also, you know, stills like this one. All right, so Barbara, how are we doing on time? I think we're pretty much done with this house. Should we take questions and engage in a conversation perhaps? What do you think?
Yeah, we could do that. I would like to ask a question to Sultan. If you can say a few words about the architect that built this house, and we would like to know if the house was built for the foundation or you put your collection after it was already built.
Yes, thank you. So as I mentioned on the chat earlier, the architect is Mr. Amir Rahbar from Iran, who's been in the UAE for almost 40 years. You might have known his daughter, Sani Rahbar. She's one of the co-founders of Third Line Gallery. If you know Third Line Gallery in Esserkal, previously it was also in Algoz. Mr. Amir Rahbar is a very important architect who moved to Dubai maybe 40 years ago, and he worked on a number of important projects, including the in my time, we used to call it National Bank of Dubai on the creek. So if you go on the creek of Dubai, you have that building with the little sail-like structure. So he worked with Carlos Ott, the architect who designed it. He was the local architect. So it was a collaboration between them. This house that you are visiting now is from the year 2000. I bought it 10 years later. So this house was designed for an Emirati and family, and they're twin houses. They're two houses, they're exactly the same. And I bought it 10 years later, around the same time that I started Barjeel, about a year later. So it was not built for me, but just wanted to acknowledge the architect. I think was one of the most important architects working in the UAE. His architecture company is called Dubark, if you look it up, Amir Rahbar.
Thank you very much.
Barbara, sorry if I could interject. We actually forgot to speak about a very interesting work that we have hung here on the ceiling. Can you see this metal barbed wire circle?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, so this is a work by an Algerian artist, Adil Abdesamad, and it's actually supposed to be displayed on the wall, or at least that's how I've seen it displayed before, but because of space considerations, and also because it's such a sharp wire, we decided to hang it on the ceiling. And again, you know, it's a conceptual piece, but a lot of readings come to mind, especially when you think of, you know, the circle as kind of being a shape that has no edges, no corners, and yet he uses a material which is so sharp and biting to create it. And at the same time, the way that he carves it, it almost creates an opening of sorts. But in reality, of course, barbed wire is normally used to create barriers and fences and so forth. So I just thought I'd mention this work since it just popped into my eye as we were speaking here now.
We have seen many acceleration of mega trends recently, like the digitalization, the artificial intelligence, or virtual life with all these webinars, such as today also. And I would like to know, in this fast changing, how have recent trends changed your views about art, the foundation, or your collection?
How have my views changed? Is that your question?
Yes, regarding all this modernity suddenly happening.
So I think, you know, when I started buying art 20 years ago, I was not very much knowledgeable of this world. There wasn't much text or literature, and whatever was available was not digitized. And so if you had no access to libraries, it was very difficult to come across it. There was, of course, text. There were, of course, books, but not all of them were accessible, at least for me. I started buying contemporary works in the turn of the century. And then by the mid 2000, what do you call them? I don't know, 2000 teens, 2014, 15, 16. I started buying modern works and more works by women artists. So I'm very proud to say now that the collection is very much gender balanced, very much balanced in terms of modern and contemporary. Although my preference now is definitely to modern works and definitely to women artists. So if I find works by male or female artists, I tend to go after the works by women artists because I find them to be more interesting for me. They're all good, but I find the women works to be more interesting for me. I think Suhaila has made it to the house.
Here in the second villa now, and maybe we'll just do the first floor because Barbara, it's up to you. I'm just cautious of time, but here we have a work by Syrian artist Ziad Dalloul, and he's known for these dreamlike imaginary landscapes that, you know, for me personally at least, kind of are reminiscent when someone makes their way through the forest. On the wall next to it here, we have a work by Kamil Tilmisani, who's an Egyptian artist and was the teacher of another prominent Egyptian artist, Inji Fattoun, who some of you might know. And this work, I don't want to take it off the wall now, but it's actually double-sided. There is a study for a different work on the back, on the flip side of this work. And in this room, perhaps I will briefly mention whose photograph you can see here, and Zineb is actually the first Algerian artist who was selected to represent France in the upcoming Venice Biennale. And this is a photograph that comes from a series called Sugar Craters, and where she kind of photographs these piles of cane sugar. All right, so moving ahead. Here's another smaller example of a work by Mohamed Said Baalbeki, the Lebanese artist that we have already seen in another room, who paints these heaps of objects that are piled together, kind of, you know, alluding to the idea of picking up and moving very quickly in times of conflict. And in this room, we have another work by the Tunisian artist Essid. And if we can just come a little closer, you'll see that again, this work is quite different from his usual work on canvas because it's actually an embroidered piece. So I don't know if you can again catch the details of the thread, but it's entirely done in embroidery. Here on above the bed are two smaller pieces, and I hope I'm not making a mistake with the artist's name. These are very, very recent acquisitions by Talal Hamada from Kuwait, and they're called, they're from the Quarantine series, and of course, again, inspired by the kind of experience we all went through during 2020. Above the mirror there, is a series by Taysir Batniji, a Palestinian artist called Pixels. And well, you are seeing these works from quite a distance now, so they do appear as blindfolded figures. But if you come closer, they're actually all executed on checkered paper with pencil, so they appear very, very pixelated and quite difficult to kind of make out a picture of when you're looking at them very closely. And on this wall here is a larger work by Shadi Zakzouk, kind of reflecting on the uprisings of 2011. So you can see different symbols from the media that were circulating the media at the time. All right. Sort of a collection, a documentation of, again, from Essid, the artist who works with the style that we now call calligraffiti. And these are his process materials from the time he painted a minaret on a mosque in Gabes. So you can even see kind of the keys from the mosque, and then the verses that he borrowed from for the graffiti work. All right, so maybe we can come back to the living room now. And Barbara, if you can let us know if there were any questions in the chat, we'll be very happy to answer them.
Hello. Yes, my question is because I saw that most of the works are very narrative and with a touch of surrealism. So I would like to know if this is a special taste or special interest of Sultan to this kind of paintings, to tell you anything, not only colors, forms, but also meanings. And yeah, this is my question.
Thank you, Maria. I think obviously the taste of the collector changes as he or she develops and acquires and sometimes de-accesses and sells works. The truth is that I was more attracted towards the aesthetics of works earlier in collecting, and then finally I realized that I'm more interested in the narrative, the socio-political background of works. And so I realized that figurative works were more interesting for me. And then I found out that as I started reading, that even landscapes and even abstract works have a socio-political dimension. And so, yes, some of the works are, how did you say, surrealist, but many of the works are abstract, many of the works are figurative. Many of the figurative works are in Sharjah at the Art Museum, and many of the abstract works are here in Boston. And so you're seeing really the remnants of what is there in the UAE. There are about 1,000 works in the storage facility. And so what you're seeing now is about 100 works in the house. Am I right, Suhaila? 100, 150 works maybe in the house?
Yes, something like that.
Mm-hmm. And of course, what gets hung downstairs is not always the work that you wish to show. Sometimes it's what's available. Sometimes it's works that have come back from a loan. Sometimes it's works that we hadn't seen in a long time, and so we wanted to show them in the house because they're not on display in the museum. I hope that answers your question, Maria. Thank you.
Lina's question was about the criteria. Do you have specific criteria before buying art, or how do you choose to buy something or not to buy something?
My criteria is to ask Suhaila. So Suhaila can elaborate.
Well, Barbara and Lina, that we get this question a lot actually, and people ask us, what is your kind of technique for selecting, or like the criteria? To be frank with you, we don't have a single method for how we look for works or how we select and decide to purchase a work, but we always speak about each piece individually, and sometimes they're bought for completely different reasons. One could be for its art historical value. For instance, if it was part of an important art movement or artistic group or collective that was established during a significant moment of history, so then that becomes very important to the telling of the story. At other times, it's due to its political context and content, something that perhaps was produced as, to support a revolt or a particular political movement. And so then that dimension of the work becomes interesting. So it's not necessarily a single criterion that we have, but, really kind of look and research about every piece, and also speak to other colleagues, both from the art world, but also from academia, and kind of try to gauge what is important for the collection. And as Sultan was saying, it did start as a private collection, but over the years it kind of developed or sort of is now more geared towards the public eye, right? So with this mission of telling art history to, and making these pieces accessible to the public and to the academic community, then those thoughts are in our minds when we're acquiring work, like what would be useful for either the general public, or what we think could interest the work of researchers. So these are some of the ways in which we go about purchasing works.
Thank you so much, Wella. If somebody has another question, we welcome any question.
Hi, I'm Hannah. Nice meeting you all, and thank you for letting us see your wonderful painting in your home. This is very unusual, really. I would like to ask you a question about how do you see the Arab artist going forward compared in your position now that you are in the States?
Well, my interest is on art from South Asia to North Africa, including the Arab world, Turkey, Iran. And I think artists from this region still are in much need of support, still are in much need of being documented, being cataloged. We are making huge steps now these days on representation in museums. So if you go to the Tate, if you go to the MoMA, you see the works of Ibrahim al-Salahi, of Salwa Rawda Shukair, of Marcos Grigorian, of Iran. And so you're seeing a lot of artists from the region who are being represented. So the difference between my time and this time is vast, but we don't have enough supporters of Middle Eastern art. It's not yet enough. We have a lot of institutions and foundations in the Middle East who are still buying a lot of Western art, which I don't understand. We are still having a lot of, which is lovely, but it doesn't really add value to the narrative of your region, right?
What about quality? The quality of the painting. I mean,
I might say something controversial here, but I think Middle Eastern work is superior to Western art. I think our art is better than Western art. To be honest with you, I think with the fact that our artists have gone through colonialism, our artists have been denied the right to art education, our artists have been denied the materials, canvases, oils, concrete, ink, paint, and the fact that they produce this superior art is much more impressive. I would rather see African or South Asian art over European art any day of the week. I like European art. I'm not saying it's bad, but I'm just saying that given all the advantages they have, it's not that impressive. Sometimes I go to Western art museums and I feel very bored. And then I see the one work by an Indian artist or an African artist, and I think it's the most impressive thing in the museum. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I am brainwashed that my art, my regional art is better. But this is what I see after 20 years of reading about art from my region. And so I'm very happy that Western museums are recognizing, acknowledging African, Asian, Middle Eastern art. I hope that we do the same. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We have a question from Noura. Noura, would you like to ask your question?
Since you put me on the spot, Barbara, okay, I'll say it on the microphone. So who, in your view, are the most exciting young Emirati artists right now in the UAE?
Thank you, Noura. It's very difficult for me to give you an answer. I think that the first thing I will say is that they're all women. Okay, I think that's very simple, easy to say. The second thing I would say is, not because she's a relative of mine, she's a very distant relative, but I think Farah Al-Qasmi is one of the most fascinating artists there is, or there are. Farah has left all the comfort of the UAE. Farah comes from a very well-to-do family. She can live a life of luxury in the UAE, in Abu Dhabi. Her father is a senior diplomat. Her mother is a Lebanese-American academic. She, you know, her entire family are well-to-do. She left all that. She lives in Brooklyn. She lives like an artist. She doesn't have a luxury home. She is being shown in galleries in New York, and only now she's recognized in the UAE, only recently. And so Farah, you see her work in billboards in Brooklyn. And I was walking in a gallery, I was walking in a street in New York, I go into a gallery and Farah is showing there. I didn't even know that. And so Farah, I think, is an international Emirati artist. Other artists also, of course, Ibtisam Abdelaziz. Ibtisam Abdelaziz also left this life of luxury in the UAE, has been living in Washington for the past few years. She's one of the top abstract artists there are in the UAE. Other ones, of course, are Fatima Al-Wutah, Afra Bahri, and I'm sure I feel I will forget names, but they're all women. I'm sure there's some interesting men, but the ones I like are the there's so many women names. But I hope
Thank you.
that satisfies your question.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sultan. I think that was the last question. Except if you would like to tell us what would be the question you would have liked us to ask you.
What would be the question? Oh boy. Oh man. Oh boy. Why? I don't know what to say. Really? Okay. Why isn't there a Barjeel Art Museum?
Ah.
Hey, okay. Should I answer the question I asked myself? That's so strange. Well, so why there isn't a Barjeel Art Museum is because of two reasons. Number one, it's very expensive. So if each one of you wants to give me about 1 million dirhams, that will be about 40 million dirhams. It will be perfect to build a museum. The other reason is that we have a lovely accommodation with the Sharjah Art Museum, where they give us, I think, over 1,200 square meters, which is bigger than any museum I can build. And also the fact that the Sharjah Art Museum is the first museum of art in the Gulf from 1995 originally. The building is 97, but the museum operated from a smaller building for 2 years until this one was built. And we have an entire wing there. And it's a wonderful collaboration that's been going on since 2018. And so it's been 3 years now that we're working with Sharjah Art Museum. So these are the two reasons why there's no Barjeel Art Museum.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Sultan, for opening your houses for us today. Thank you for this very friendly discussion and for writing all the names of the artists. That was very helpful. Thank you, Suhaila, for this beautiful visit of Sultan's Foundation. And thank you, Noura, if I'm correct, it's Noura.
Yeah, here.
Hello, thank you so much for holding the video, allowing us to see the beautiful collection. Dear Sultan, how busy you are, and we're very honored that you took the time for us today from Boston. As people know, Sharjah is known for being the cultural capital of the UAE, and obviously this is due to the amazing work you have done. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and expertise with us. On behalf of the Art Circle Board, I would like to thank you all for joining us today. Do not hesitate to follow our webpage or Instagram, artcircle.ae, where you will find the replays of our webinars and general information about the Art Circle. Stay safe, stay tuned, and see you soon. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Maya.
Hi, that was great. Thank you, guys.
Hi, everyone.